All right, let's dive into something pretty wild today. We're going to unravel a fascinating case of historical mistaken identity. And this isn't just some old, dusty story. No, this is a mix-up that sits right at the heart of ancient prophecy, and believe it or not, it profoundly affects how millions of people read today's headlines. I mean, just think about this for a second. What if historians suddenly announced that the American Civil War actually took place in Argentina? It's absurd, right? It makes no sense. Well, get this, that's pretty much the exact kind of geographical leap that has become common when people try to identify the Romans or Ar-Rūm mentioned in ancient texts.
So that brings us to the big mystery here. How on earth did an entire, incredibly powerful civilization get so completely lost in translation? We're about to put on our detective hats and find out.
Okay, first things first, let's set the scene for this intellectual crime. We are looking at a classic case of mistaken identity, and it's high time we unmasked the real subjects of a prophecy that was made 1,400 years ago. So here's the core of the confusion. When most of us hear the word Romans, our minds immediately jump to Italy, right? The Colosseum, Rome, maybe the modern West in general. But the historical reality, it points somewhere completely different, to the Eastern Roman Empire, which we know today as the Byzantine Empire. And here's our first bombshell piece of evidence that really throws a wrench in the modern Italian theory. The Western Roman Empire, the one centered in Rome, had already collapsed a staggering 550 years before the Prophet Muhammad was even born. So in the 7th century, they were literally ancient history. So, if the prophecy wasn't about the folks in Italy, who was it about? Well, the evidence gets even stronger when we start following the linguistic trail. The clues, it turns out, are hidden right there in the language itself. The key, the absolute linchpin, is understanding the term Ar-Rūm. In 7th century Arabic, this wasn't some vague, fuzzy term. It had a very specific, unambiguous meaning, the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantium. This meaning was basically set in stone, in the 30th chapter of the Quran, which is literally titled Ar-Rūm. And it's all about the massive war between the Byzantines and the Sasanian Persians, the two superpowers right on Arabia's doorstep at the time. And they were so precise about it. Classical Arabic had a different word for everybody. Rome specifically meant the Byzantines. If they wanted to talk about people from the city of Rome, they'd say Rouman. If they meant Greek speakers in Europe, that was Eunenion. And Western Europeans, like the Crusaders who showed up later, they were called Faranj. You see? For the people listening back then, there was zero confusion.
And get this, the name Rūm stayed geographically locked to the eastern Mediterranean for over 1,000 years. When the Seljuk Turks conquered Byzantine Anatolia, what did they call their new kingdom? The Sultanate of Rūm. Centuries later, the Ottomans called their European lands Rumelia, literally the land of the Romans. That name never, ever migrated west to Italy. It stayed right there, in what is now Turkey and the Balkans. Okay, so we've followed the breadcrumbs of language and geography, and they've all led us east. Now it's time for the smoking gun. I'm talking about the historical fingerprint test, where we match the prophecy's own descriptions against our suspects.
A famous narration recorded in the well-known collection Sahih Muslim gives us a very specific 5-point checklist to identify who the real Rūm are. They're described as people who show patience during tough times, who recover quickly from disaster, who are resilient in battle, who are the best of people to the poor and weak, and who stand up to their own oppressive rulers. This is our fingerprint. Let's see who it belongs to.
So who matches the print? Let's break it down. Military resilience? The Byzantines were legendary for bouncing back from absolute catastrophes, while the Latin West at the time was a fragmented patchwork of feudal lords. What about welfare? Well, Byzantium had a sophisticated state-run hospital system that was centuries ahead of its time. And resisting tyranny? Their political system actually had mechanisms for deposing unjust emperors. It's a perfect match for the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so if the evidence is this clear, why is there any confusion at all? That's a great question. Next up, we're going to uncover the reasons behind this massive, centuries-long case of mistaken identity. The sources point to 4 main culprits here. First, there's a fancy term called eschatological presentism, which is basically just the very human urge to make ancient prophecies fit today's news headlines.
Second, it's geopolitically convenient. It's way more exciting to say Rome is a modern superpower like the US than some empire that disappeared centuries ago. Third is just plain old historical amnesia. After Byzantium fell in 1453, its identity kind of faded away. And finally, there's the nationalist trap. The founders of modern Turkey actively rejected their own state's Ottoman and Roman heritage, which broke a crucial link in that historical chain.
So, after all this detective work, where does that leave us? Well, in our final section, we're going to find the real Romans. And it turns out they've been hiding in plain sight this whole time.
So who are the true heirs to this Byzantine legacy? The historical Romans of prophecy are, in fact, the peoples of modern Turkey, which sits on the Byzantine heartland, and Greece, which carries on its linguistic and religious heritage. They're right there.
And here is the ultimate historical irony. The Ottoman Turks who conquered the Byzantines didn't just wipe them out. In many ways, they saw themselves as their successors. After conquering Constantinople in 1453, Sultan Mehmed II proudly took on the title Kaiser Ar-Rūm, that's Caesar of Rome. The conquerors themselves claimed the Roman identity, ensuring it continued right where it had always been.
And this whole journey brings us to one final, really important question we should ask ourselves. When we look at ancient texts, are we genuinely trying to understand what they meant in their own time, in their own context? Or are we just reading our own modern headlines, our own anxieties, and our own politics back into them? Something to think about.